Welcome to the Roncast, where entrepreneurs find killer tips, techniques, and tools to start and growth hack any business. Brought to you by one of Canada's favorite business personalities, Ron Davies. Enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome back to the Roncast. Certainly a different time we're in now, isn't it? I mean, we're seeing people getting pretty creative and people are getting on the offensive business-wise. And that's what I want to get into a little bit in this episode with you here today. We want to basically talk about how the new currency right now is definitely attention and how it's affecting your life and how you can take advantage of that. The truth is that nobody could have predicted the current situation, but like it or not, it's definitely here. And this pandemic, this COVID-19 pandemic is definitely the black swan that business owners and operators have been dreading. Growing a business during an economic contraction is a completely different beast and definitely not easy. But while everyone around you is kind of panicking or frozen by fear, and as your tendency is to go into survival mode as well and contract and pull back. But your perception is your reality, and you must protect it with your life, because as the news cycle spews panic and fear 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they're controlling your perception and creating your reality. News companies aren't really in the business of news. I mean, this isn't like 40 years ago. The business of news is more the business than it is the news. News is just a vehicle or a conduit that allows them to arbitrage media attention, because attention equals advertising dollars. We know in digital marketing that we pay CPM. We pay so much money per 1,000 exposures or per click. And in media, the more people that are watching a station, the more valuable the advertising inventory is when they're watching that station. So think about the business model for a moment. In order to win the war for attention, that is to monetize better than other stations, podcasts, newspapers, websites, and so forth, each news station has to write more and more sensational headlines than the last, to where now they're just completely bombastic. They're always breaking the latest terror, the latest horror, because bad news sells far better than good news. So despite what actually might be happening with the pandemic, the news station is writing the next sort of throat-grabbing headline. Why is that? Because, as I mentioned in the beginning, attention is the new currency. And news is simply the commodity they're pushing to collect that currency. The story they're breaking isn't unique, and what extracts the most amount of eyeball minutes is not the facts of the story, but rather how sensationalist and clickbaity you can make that story. These sensational headlines trigger public fear, and this creates mass hysteria, right? And this hysteria kind of forms everyone's new reality. So I'm not saying the pandemic isn't happening. Its threat is very real. However, the side effect of this sort of never-ending negative vomit is that even if a recession wasn't looming because of the pandemic, having every news station around the world screaming it at you every 60 seconds, and then when you go to bed, having it sit in your subconscious, percolating all night, because that's what happens, is it sits in your head. It's the last thing you expose your head to. That's why I never watch the 11 o'clock news at night, right? Because you take in all this negativity and it just cooks away in your head all night. Always end the day with something positive. But that aside, maybe the catalyst to it actually happening is all of this negative news. Again, perception is reality. So what's the answer? Well, you need to actively control your environment, because the downstream effect is that it creates your reality. That means you need to be looking at the inputs into your mental machine, which is you, and replace all that negative news with things like books and courses and documentaries and CEO interviews, home workouts, running. But beyond everything, now is the time to take massive action. Action is always the antidote to fear. Being an ex-military guy, I can attest to this. And anybody that's ever been in a really difficult situation, as soon as you have to act on it, the fear subsides. I don't know if you've ever had the misfortune of happening upon a car accident that just occurred, but what happens is your adrenaline gets going and you do what needs to be done. You rescue people, you do whatever you have to do, and you don't really feel the fear until after. Well, this is a less dramatic kind of thing happening right now. We are in the wake of this accident, this release of this pandemic, and now is the time to take action, not be fearful. Even if we are headed into a recession, even if the boogeyman is coming to take everything you've worked so hard to achieve, doing nothing isn't going to help you. Xbox isn't going to help you. Standing around drinking beside the barbecue every day isn't going to help you, but taking immediate, extreme action will. During these kind of times, these turbulent times, you need to be on the offensive, changing your messaging and your offer. So embrace this new normal, because you can't end it. Another thing to remember is that during the last big recession, which started in 2008, there were a number of companies that were started. See if you recognize any of these names of companies that were started during the recession. Uber, ever hear of it? Uber, the largest taxi company in the world that owns no taxis. Airbnb, the largest accommodations company in the world, doesn't own any accommodations. Slack, Pinterest, WhatsApp, Square, that's just the beginning of the list. So the reality is that some of the most iconic companies of the next decade will undoubtedly be launched and incubated right now as you're listening to me speak. So why not become a part of that? Why not reach out? Find local incubators in your area. They're normally at co-working facilities. It could be Regent. It could be any of the Spencer Trask establishments. And get into that culture. Start hanging out in that culture, because that's where all of your solutions live. Sure, I'm happy to give you the solutions. You just have to reach out. But you really need to get your head in the game and start getting right on top of this kind of thing. I ask that you be sure to subscribe, because there's lots of cool stuff coming, and that you like this podcast, this episode, and important that you comment. And if in your comment you put an email address, I'll be sure to reach out to you and keep in touch with you, and also try to share it with others, because the way we're going to get through this thing on top is by working together, because the reality is we are all in this together. Have a wonderful day. I'm your host. Until next time, this is the Roncast.
Hi guys, how cool is it that I can talk about something that I love, which is helping people grow or start a business, and I can even get paid just for the talking part? Well, that's how it is here on Anchor. I use Anchor.fm as my podcasting platform, and they do all kinds of cool stuff to make it easier for me. First of all, it's free, right? That's kind of attractive, and that's how I started. They have really cool tools. In fact, right now I'm talking to you through my smartphone. I've recorded this podcast today, which I think is my 30th or 31st podcast using my smartphone. And it's an app that comes from Anchor, and that also is free. So they have all these creation tools that make it easy to record your podcast right from your phone or from your computer. They have cool things like drag and drop transitions, and you can put in your intro or your outro. You probably heard my intro already. That came from a guy on Fiverr. He did it for me, and it's stored right in my smartphone. The other cool thing is Anchor actually distributes your podcast for you. So it can be heard in places like Spotify or Apple Podcast, and about 7 or 8 other places that they send it to as well, all automatically. you can make money from your podcast, which I mentioned right at the beginning. They'll pay you for the number of people that hear different ads from the publishers, or rather from the advertisers that go into your published podcast. So Anchor.fm, all in this app and all on their site, they have everything that you need to make a podcast and get paid for it all in one place. So I'm really a big fan, because those that follow me recognize I'm one of the laziest marketing and salespeople ever. I'm a huge fan of leverage. I like doing something or designing a system once, and it's easy to repeat. And Anchor FM was a perfect way for me to do that. So what I want to do is I want to ask you to download the Anchor app. So whether you're on iOS or on Android, you can download the Anchor app, and you can either go to Anchor.fm, or you can search it in either the Apple Store or the Google Store and install it. Because there's another cool thing we can do is, while I'm podcasting in real time, you can actually get involved with my podcast. I can invite you into the podcast, so we can kind of work together on that. And that's pretty cool too. So I invite you to check out Anchor.fm, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it. And that will be in a podcast to come up. So have a great day. Thank you.
That's it for this episode of the Roncast. Be sure to subscribe and tune in again for killer tips, techniques, and tools to growth hack any business. We hope you've enjoyed the show.